Angel's Egg, or Tenchi no Tamago as it's known in Japan, is a masterpiece. Angel's Egg is the most art house animated film I've ever seen, and it deserves to be seen by every person at least once. So why is Angel's Egg so low on my list? Before I talk about that, I'd like to mention the man behind the film. Mamoru Oshii is one of the best writers and directors ever in animation.
Do you remember the first manga you ever read?
一番最初に読んだ漫画は覚えてらっしゃいますか？
多分僕の兄貴が読んでた漫画。
It's a manga that my older brother was reading.
ロボットの漫画なんだけど。
It's a robot manga.
鉄人28号。
鉄人28号、The Iron Man 28.
それはもう何度も書いたので見ないでも書けるようになりました。
So I read that so many times that I was able to actually draw the robot without even looking at the actual art.
でそれは鉄人28号は確か5年ぐらい前だったかな。舞台でお芝居にしました。
And consequently, I actually directed a stage play of 鉄人28 5 years ago.
He has stated before that his approach to cinema is in direct contrast to the Hollywood formula.
Where does your movies start? Is it start with the story, or is it characters, or does it start with drawing on the page?
押井さんの映画の作り方っていうのはお話から始まるのか、キャラクターから始まるのか、何から順序的には何から始まるんですか？
まあずいぶん前だけど10年ぐらい前かな。アメリカに仕事で行った時にジェームズ・キャメロンと監督と話をする機会があって。
So probably more than 10 years ago, I had a chance for an opportunity to work with James Cameron.
映画ってのは3つの要素でできてるんですと彼が言った。
And he said that a movie is made of 3 elements.
キャラクターと
Characters,
ストーリー、
story,
だからその世界観、
the world.
この3つで映画はできている。
These 3 elements make up a movie.
でこの順番を間違えなければその映画は成功する。
And as long as you don't mix them up, you prioritize them in order, then you will make a successful movie.
彼が言うにはハリウッドで成功するにはまず一番目にキャラクターを考える。
So in order to succeed in Hollywood, you have to think about the characters first.
とても個性的で魅力のあるキャラクター。
Somebody that's very identifiable and attractive.
2番目にお客さんが飽きないストーリーを考える。
And you have to make a story that would not bore the audience.
3番目に現実とはちょっとだけ違った世界を考える。
Third is make a world that is slightly different from the real world.
この順番を守ればあなたもハリウッドで成功できる。
As long as you follow these directions or instructions, you will be successful in Hollywood.
自分はいつもその順番に考えている。
And I've always followed that direction.
ただ僕はいつもその逆で考えてた。
But I was それを聞くまで。But up until he told me this, I was thinking of it in a reverse order.
まず最初に世界観を考えます。
For me, I think about the world first.
どんな世界の映画なのか。
I have to decide what kind of world the movie takes place in.
それから2番目にストーリーを考えます。
And then I think about the story.
3番目にその世界とストーリーにふさわしいキャラクターを考える。
And then I think of the characters that's suitable for this world and the story.
今もそうしてます。
And I still do it like that.
多分ハリウッドで成功できないと思う。
I don't think I will be successful in Hollywood.
He has also said that his main motivation in making a film is to create worlds different than our own. His films are dark, thought-provoking pieces, minimalistic criticisms of our world which are never less complex than they are fascinating to experience. With that being said, Angel's Egg was the first original film the man was able to do. His freshman and sophomore features being the first and second films in the Urusei Yatsura film series, Only You and Beautiful Dreamer respectively, the latter of which is widely considered an anime classic in its own right. Angel's Egg is Mamoru off his leash, with complete creative control, and it was during a hard time in his life that it was made. Prior to production on Angel's Egg, Mamoru Oshii lost his faith in Christianity, and the film clearly shows the existential dissonance that caused inside of him. The film deals with identity and faith in such a patient but desperate way. The entirety of the plot is a metaphor in a nightmare hellscape cased by a bad trip. It would take months of my life to analyze this dense film to understand all it has to say, but even what I was able to gather left me in a trance that stayed with me for some time. I don't want to give what this film is away. Please watch it. It's available on YouTube. And if you like an in-depth, spoiler-rich analysis, I highly recommend Chris Duckman's video on the topic. What I will mention is why it's so low on my list despite my praise. As a film critic, and a film viewer in general, my favorite part of a film is the characters. I love getting to know them and living in the worlds presented to me through those characters. This film, as uniquely beautiful as it is, has characters that don't have an ounce of personality. It makes things worse that there are only really 2 characters in the film, so I spent an hour with 2 people and I learned very little about them other than the metaphorical greatness that is thrown at me. In a way, you could say that Mamoru-sama's outlook on film is the reason the film suffered for me. I will also say that this is extremely personal and it won't have the same effect on everyone. I know this has the capacity to be many people's favorite film, animated or not, and in a different life, maybe it would be mine too. But I couldn't have a list like this without mentioning this true work of art. It would feel sinful. Speaking of Mamoru Oshii,
an ocean, a cave, a dream that no one could save. A shelter, a whole act, a light that died with the night. You and I, we got our differences. Yet I thought we were more alike than unlike.
Japan's relationship with its armed forces was once a defining characteristic of the nation. Fukoku Kyuhei, enrich the state, strengthen the military, was the battle cry of the reformers who founded modern Japan during the Meiji Restoration beginning in the 1860s. Fast forward to after the devastation caused during Operation Meeting House, the single most destructive bombing raid in history, whereon 10,000 acres of Tokyo were destroyed, 100,000 civilians dead, over 1 million homeless, and the much more infamous nuclear bombings of both Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which together killed 129,000 people, whom together killed between 129,000 and 226,000 people, whom were mostly civilians. Needless to say, this changed the nation, and led, in part, to the end of World War II. After the World War, Japan was left with no military force. Article 9 of the Constitution of Japan, drafted by the now occupying United States in 1947, required the country to renounce war as a sovereign right of the nation, and the threat and use of force as means of settling international disputes. This prohibited Japan from having land, sea, or air forces, as well as any other war potential. This condition left Japan's security in the hands of only the local police, who had little to no military training, and the American military that was occupying Japan at the time. Because of the defenseless position they were in as a nation, Japan established what would later be called the Japanese Self-Defense Force, or JSDF, which had land, sea, and air branches, and to this day serves as a de facto military and holds the principle of civilian control. This led to civilian officials in the ministry to have more power than uniformed officers of the JSDF, in hopes of avoiding such catastrophes as what was faced during the war. The JSDF, therefore, was only to be used as a domestic outfit to protect Japan territory from foreign invasion, for disaster relief, and aid in peacekeeping, but not to be deployed in any capacity on foreign soil. I give this little history lesson to enrich the experience of my next film, Pat Labor 2, which is entirely about Japan's involvement in the US's global police strategy a la peacekeeping operations in other nations, and their one-sided relationship with the US. Considering I myself am in the US military, this is all I'll say on the matter, but I will quote Mamoru-sama himself. In Pat Labor 2, I wanted to describe the Cold War for Japan. It was a war, but a silent war. When the Cold War existed between the US and Russia, the stance of Japan was to not be directly involved. Even though Japan was involved, it kept insisting for 50 years that it wasn't. I wanted to describe that fake peace. In the opening scene of Patlabor 2, a JFDS unit stationed in Southeast Asia are attacked by hostile forces during maneuvers in the jungle. The unit, led by Suge Yukihito, are equipped with patrol labors, or Patlabors for short, which are large manned robots, and are more than a match for the hostile tanks. Suge's request to Central Command for permission to engage the enemy is denied, and he is ordered to take evasive action and wait for the arrival of another unit. The delay turned out to be deadly, and the Japanese Patlabors are decimated by enemy fire. This mimics life, as officers and non-commissioned officers were not permitted to order the troops to fire. You see, Patlabor 2 was produced in the aftermath of a debate that was surfacing both in Japan and internationally over Japan's responsibility in the world as a wealthy and technologically advanced nation, and about the nature of Japan's relationship with the US and Japan's own responsibility in the post-Cold War world. Both Kazunori Ito, the writer of Patlabor 2, and Mamoto Oshii, who directed, were opposed to the deployment of JSDF personnel to participate in UNTAC, a UN peacekeeping mission in Cambodia, since JSDF was formed originally not as a sort of military body for post-World War II Japanese government. It's these beliefs that fuel the film. Several real-life incidents are mentioned or used for the movie, and it gives this film a different feel than others on my list. This feels like an important history lesson as much as it is a visually stunning film. The characters are more fleshed out than in Angel's Egg, and the themes are more personally approachable for me. You don't have to agree with what the film has to say to be able to take in the beauty of it, and see the mind state of two men who saw their nation going in a direction they would rather avoid. This was a hard film for me to find, but if you are able to, I highly recommend it.
Everything is great inside this narrow maze.
You're crazy! You're imminent! I'm just waiting down these cars and planes, I'm always boarding. Just out touring down in Charlotte.
I thought I told you to come down to dinner!
When I'm performing, never boring. Now
You'll
you
come
can't
out
afford
alone.
it. Champagne,
I'll break down the
period.
door!
Finish frames on my face. Looking like I'm from the deep. These no Cartiers.
No.
It's deep, deep, deep. I can make it in my seat. Bro. Do you, I'm doing me, bro. Making noise, use a beat.
Join me for dinner.
Press the button and the
No,
doors go
thank you.
like.
You can't stay in there forever!
Yes, I can.
Fine! Go ahead and starve!
The tale is old as time. Well, the tale is old as 1740. Beauty and the Beast was a fairy tale written by French novelist Gabrielle Suzanne de Villeneuve that was famously made into a masterpiece film in 1946. In 1991, the movie giant, Disney Animation Studios, who just before this had saved itself from financial peril with The Little Mermaid in 1989, decided that they wanted to take a swing at this truly beloved story. This film officially ushered in what is today known as the Disney Renaissance, the period from 1989 to 1999, wherein Disney Animation Studios became the giant of animation we know today, producing beloved film after beloved film, starting with The Little Mermaid and ending officially with Tarzan. A return to the classic fairy tale musical formula that Walt Disney had popularized during his lifetime, but with the addition of a Broadway musical feel that was brought to Disney at the time by the genius Howard Ashman.
Howard is referred to by Roy Disney as another Walt, which shocked me when I was interviewing him. Of all people, why would Roy say this about Howard Ashman? But he was. To us and to our generation, he was a Walt Disney time.
And I think Howard Ashman was the key to much of our success.
He came in from the outside, Jewish, gay, Baltimore, theater, nothing in common with us. I mean, we were all kids from Southern California, and Howard comes in and says, no, you don't understand. Telling stories with music is central to what Disney is, and here's how you do it.
Beauty and the Beast is the story of Gaston, a 1980s action star's wet dream, and the embodiment of toxic masculinity, who is admired by all the men in his hometown and lusted after by all the women, all except the woman he truly wants to marry, Belle, which means beauty in French. Like her name suggests, Belle, is the most beautiful woman in town, but she is also considered the most strange. Her nose always on a good book, and her mind always dreaming of life much bigger than the provincial one she has.
I want much more than this provincial life.
In the reprisal of her introduction song, which is explicitly inspired by The Sound of Music, she sings on wanting much more than to be Gaston's little wife.
Can you imagine? He asked me to marry him. Madame Gaston,
his little wife.
But when her father is thrown behind bars for trespassing in the castle of the ruler of the land, Belle makes a deal with the prince of the castle. The prince, who is only ever referred to as the Beast, is a whiny man-child who, as a whiny regular child, answered the door to the castle at night, unsupervised by an adult, and refused to let a stranger inside, so is rightfully cursed to be transformed into a chimera with dreamy blue eyes. Belle's deal with the whiny man-beast child was that she would take the place of her father as prisoner, and the beast accepts because the only way for him to return to human is for him to make a girl fall in love with him, which teaches him a lesson, probably. Long story short, and believe me, this story thicker than a Pixar mom.
Damn nigga, what you doing out here with all this ass? Double cheeked up on a Thursday afternoon, hella ass, the sun is still out, my nigga.
Belle is able to change the beast's behavior and make him to a more gentle man, and the beast gives Belle a whole ass library, so they fall in love. Gaston gets butthurt that Belle doesn't want him, and he tries to kill the beast, but my boy's like a 9-foot chimera. So Gaston bites the bullet, but the beast is knocked unconscious. Belle says she loves the beast, he turns human, happily ever after. I love this film for many reasons. The musical segments are catchy, and the music is great. The score makes the film feel more epic than earlier Disney films, and certain sequences, in particular the ballroom scene, are some of the best work Disney has ever done. All that said, I have major issues with the themes of the film. All possible Stockholm Syndrome aside, and that's a big thing that I'm just pushing aside. The messages I got from this film are as follows. 1. Changing a man is not only possible, but you might be saving his life. 2. If you are rich enough to buy her affection, then it doesn't matter how attractive you are. 3. If you are a child and a stranger comes knocking at your door and asks for shelter, you better let them in without asking your parents, or you might be cursed to become a beast. And 4. Women should forget about their desire for adventure and be content with life as a wife, as long as the husband is super rich. Like Belle deadass says,
I want adventure in the great wide somewhere.
And that is never brought up again as part of her character. It's a great film. There are just many pieces that don't add up to me as far as the theme goes.
I know a lot of you sisters be like, chivalry is dead. Don't y'all feel that way? Like men aren't gentlemen anymore? Chivalry is dead, and women killed it.
They say even the proudest spirit can be broken with love. Of course, chocolate never hurts. Like what?
I want to be with my real mom and dad. I want you to let me go.
Is that any way to talk to your mother?
You aren't my mother.
Apologize at once. I'll give you to the count of 3. 1, 2, 3!
In the late 1990s, Will Vinton Studios, known for the work on The PJs, Return to Oz, and The California Raisin Show, sought funds for more feature-length films and brought in outside investors, which included Nike Inc. owner Phil Knight, whose son, Travis Knight, worked at the studio as an animator.
I think the Knight boys have a long history of disappointing their fathers. My dad's dad, he was a lawyer, and when his son told him that he wanted to make, fancy little running shoes for a living, it broke his heart. And I think you can't help but feel some degree of pressure when you grow up in the shadow of someone who's tremendously successful, someone who's an innovator. That's a lot to live up to. But at the same time, he's just a guy, and he's my dad. He gave me that really meaningful advice, which is find that thing that you were put on this earth to do and give it everything you have.
In 2002, Phil Knight acquired the financially struggling Will Vinton Studios to pursue feature-length productions. In July 2005, the successor to Will Vinton Studios was founded and named Laika, after the dog sent to space by the Soviet Union in 1957. Phil Knight would act as chairman while his son Travis Knight was ushered in as president and CEO. The studio's first feature film would be Coraline, based on the novella by Neil Gaiman, who we know co-wrote the screenplay for Beowulf. The film stars Dakota Fanning as the titular Coraline.
I wasn't saddled with anything. It's Coraline.
Caroline what?
Coraline. Coraline Jones.
And was directed by Henry Selick, who is known for Nightmare Before Christmas and James and the Giant Peach. Coraline is an unusual film in many respects. Mixing traditional stop-motion animation with 3D technology, there were more than 28 animators working at any one time on rehearsing or shooting scenes for the film, and producing 90 to 100 seconds of finished animation each week. This unique dark addition to American animation is about a young girl named Coraline who is neglected by her mother and father, who are both writers, and so she wanders her new home and discovers new, more attentive parents that exist in another world. This film is filled with imagination and horrific wonder. The storytelling and visuals on display are unique, seeing as stop motion is a struggling art form, with clear motifs throughout and the film begging for analysis. From the constant array of buttons, especially where eyes once were, to the key to the other world being like a gateway to Pandora's box. The snow globe that represents imprisonment, the other mother's spider form showing how her true power is her web of lies and deceit. There's tons to unpack here. Speaking of the other mother, she deserves an award for most horrifying villain in film, specifically marketed to children. The very idea of a changeling is terrifying. The idea that someone you love could not actually be them, but a monster in disguise, it makes me shiver. Add that monster, who's really a beldam, has a goal to lure children into trusting her so that she can eat them, completing her ruse by disguising herself in the form of unsuspecting children's most trusted figure, their mother. It's pure horror. But it's balanced in the film in such a way as to make the tone feel more fantastic than horrifying. My issue with the film is that, to create this balance, the film spends the majority of its runtime sidestepping this plotline, instead deciding to spend time exploring the Pink Palace apartments, which by itself isn't an issue, but I would rather spend more time with Coraline and the other mother. Being able to see Coraline fall deeper into wanting to stay with the beldam, that would have made for a more powerful film for me. That being said, I absolutely adore this film, and all the hard work it took to achieve.
That's what I'm saying. All the hoes coming through. All of them. Hold on. Y'all see that nigga? What's that nigga doing? What's wrong with him? That nigga look distraught. Bro, hold on. He telling us to go back, bro. He is. Oh, well. Yeah, go ahead and turn this all around. Ain't nothing for us that way.
Castle in the Sky was the first official film of the legendary studio Ghibli, an animation studio founded on June 15, 1985 in Tokyo, Japan by director Hayao Miyazaki and director-producer Isao Takahata. The name Ghibli was given by Hayao Miyazaki from the Italian noun Ghibli, based on the Libyan Arabic name for the hot desert wind of Libya, the idea being the studio would blow a new wind through the anime industry. It also refers to an Italian aircraft, the Caproni CA-309 Ghibli, which is interesting for reasons that become apparent the more you know about Miyazaki-sensei and his films. Hayao Miyazaki was born on January 5th, 1941, in the town of Akebono in Bunkyo, Tokyo, the second of 4 sons. His father, Katsuji Miyazaki, was the director of Miyazaki Airplanes, which manufactured rudders for fighter planes during World War II. The business allowed his family to remain affluent during Miyazaki's early life, which was important because in 1944, when Miyazaki was 3 years old, his family had to evacuate to Utsunomiya to avoid bombings in Tokyo. Later, Utsunomiya was also bombed, and so in July 1945, Miyazaki's family evacuated to Kanuma. The bombing left a lasting impression on Miyazaki, who was age 4 at the time. It's hard for me to believe that in another timeline, when we bombed Japan, we might have killed Miyazaki and ended the possibility of Ghibli ever being created. Fast forward to Castle in the Sky, whose animation style and characters are extremely Miyazaki in design, a style that to this day hasn't been able to be replicated, but centers on something Ghibli has largely avoided ever since: an outright, uncompromising villain, and tons of violence-filled action. Miyazaki and Takahata both preferred to not have violence as the answers to the problems in their films. And that is what makes Ghibli films truly magical, a true enigma in the cinema landscape. Castle in the Sky does not suffer as an exception to this rule though. Rather, Ghibli hit the ground running and created one of the most imaginative, awe-inspiring freshman films ever. My big issue with the film is when, in the third act, the film becomes all about the villain's plan and starts to feel extremely generic because of it. There are still some very powerful images on display, and most of the characters are worthy of great praise, but none of them feel like real people to me. There are moments though. A moment singing a trumpet on the roof, a moment overhearing two young people bonding, every moment of the film that takes place in the beautiful sky. This film is full of beautiful moments, but it devolves into something less than it deserves, and it ends too abruptly.